The Space DLC is officially out. Welcome everyone to this video where we are going to be taking a look at the new Space DLC, what it's all about, what we can expect, and what we can do with it. So let's get going. The announcement went out and the Space DLC is officially out. Now here is sort of the notification that came along with it. It's saying what is included. We're going to read through part of this and see what we can do with it. So there's working space rockets, you could travel to the moon, operate in low and zero gravity, build space stations, satellites, etc. The moon is the biggest land location yet with over 1,000 square kilometers. That's huge. Create your electrolysis plant. To make liquid rocket fuel, use compressed gases. New missions occur in space, design life support systems. Obviously this looks super cool. Now looking from this picture, it seems that there may be a dedicated space where we can launch things, hopefully. Updates to the base game. While the DLC is required to leave the atmosphere, changes happened in the game. This is mostly the fluid system, so now we have compressed gases. How it works, there's oxygen, carbon dioxide, nitrogen. Gas pressure introduces new mechanics such as forces due to equalizing pressures, displacement, and more. The world now wraps around at borders, so you can actually go around the whole world. Many new components are introduced, new fluid parts, solar panels, sensors, directional communication dishes, more. And a big thank you to the community. Thank you developers for developing this. I'm so excited to see what we can do with this new space add-on. Here is the list of changes that this DLC brought. So, first thing first, I'm going to read the DLC features. So we got our atmosphere space simulation, obviously. Huge moon surface, okay. Liquid fuel rockets. Here are the liquid fuel rockets. So we got 3 of them. I'm just going to place them for size. Interesting. And a little guy. Okay. So we got our liquid fuel rockets here. Ignition, gimbal, throttle, oxygen, hydrogen. So that's what it produces. If we look on the bottom of it, there's 2 nodes. Presumably oxygen and hydrogen for the fluid. Okay. So that's this component. Electrolyzer component. Here's the part, hydrogen electrolyzer. A machine that separates water into hydrogen and oxygen, submerge the electrodes into a volume of water, and provide electric to separate them from the water. So that's interesting. You could actually go ahead and create your own type of, oxygen from the seawater. So that's interesting to note right down there. You got your ports on the bottom. RCS thruster components. So you get a little thruster that you could actually apply directional forces and end up having sort of spacecrafts move. And I did do a little brief discussion of this on a previous video that the developers showed, and this piece was able to sort of hover almost like a little drone. So it could be interesting to use this in drone-like applications and make a small creation that can kind of fly around and float around. I also would love to try this out on a helicopter where instead of a tail rotor it has this, and you just kind of push this compressed air and you don't have 2 rotors, you just have the one. Now the component here tells you all the different things you could do with it, including the directions. So you could merge them and have them all facing the same direction and kind of making the craft float no matter what, even if they are far apart. So that's really interesting to note. Then we get a reaction wheel component and an astronomy sensor. So here's the astronomy sensor, and if you place this down on the pad here, you can actually end up getting navigation based on the moon and Earth and stuff. So you can't use GPS up on moon, but you could use this thing. Then next we get space missions, which is really interesting to think that when you're up in space it's going to get you some tasks to do. So we'll see those later, hopefully not in this video but in the future. And then the next thing is the world border wrapping, which is how the world can seamlessly warp when you get from one side of the map and you automatically end up in the other half of the map. Now I did test it out, but I will show you guys how it's done and how it looks like in the game. Here we are on one side of the map, and if we just go no clipping and kind of fly through the air here, eventually we're going to cross over into the other side. Not quite yet, we're kind of in the gray area now, so we're just going to keep going on the no clipping, and sooner or later we are now going to be on the other side. Here we are on the left side, so we made a full circle around the Earth and ended up on the left hand side here. Now the moon works the exact same way. If you go to the moon, you can also have the edges kind of become the other part of the world. I did test it out, it does work very well, so that's really good to know that you can kind of circumnavigate the whole world or navigate the whole world and end up on the other side. Another thing they added is the temperature gradient, so now it matches when you're on either side of the Earth and kind of making your way around. The next thing is the large solar panels. Now this is a really nice thing to think we have, because previously the solar panels were quite small. So here we are, and we're going to type in solar panels. Now you see the size difference of these two. When you put this one down, the nice thing is you just have one electric node. Obviously you could make whatever size you wanted in the past, but take a look at this. Who likes to connect this many little electric nodes? So the new one is definitely an upgrade, and I could see it getting a lot of use for all sorts of creations. The next bit is quite lengthy, but it's pretty much the new gas feature. Now I do have to make a whole separate video to describe how the new fluid, gas, temperature, pressure is overhauled. Currently now we're going to have fluids separated into liquids and gases. We're going to have gas sensors. We're going to see an overhaul of pressures. There's going to be an overhaul of fluid transfer between components, backflow, pressure leveling, all that stuff. It may sound like big engineering words. We're going to have to take a look at all this stuff separately. Like I said, compartments now have their own temperature and pressure data, so now you can actually have a thermostat in a cabin or in some sort of call it engine room, and you could then have a fire extinguisher determine whether or not the engine's on fire. You can now have different damage from ambient pressure and heat. Inventories now have a fluid port for recharging outfits with oxygen. That also includes your air tanks for diving. So now all diving boats will need to have compressed air tanks, so keep that in mind. Fires now consume oxygen to burn and produce CO2. So I have to test this out. Can you fill a room with CO2 and put out a fire? I don't know. Currently you need oxygen to burn it, so that may be something to explore. Humans and animals breathe and consume oxygen, generate CO2, good to know. Ocean and atmospheric pressures now scale with altitude, and rapid fluid exchange across door thresholds will now apply a force. Now there are barometers, there's space and backpack seats, there's 2 outfits, and we're going to take a look at how all that looks. So if we go here and we spawn our barometer, we'll take a look and see what that does. Now it measures the current air pressure, returns the pressure of atmospheres to the compartment or the current altitude. So interesting. We'll place that there and see how that all works. Now you do have the one pressure component, and with the spacesuits, we're going to take a look at how those guys look as well. So this is one of them. This is the one I was wearing in the beginning of the video, and here's the other one, a little smaller I imagine. And you can see on the bottom they do have the port for filling up them with air. And lastly, here is the space seat. So this is how you can end up making a jetpack or something similar. So once I get figured out how to place this on the workbench, I'm going to show you. Okay, so here we have it. And let's go take a look at how this all looks in the game. Okay, so with this barometer we got our pressure and atmospheres, very interesting. So currently we're at around 1 atmosphere, which makes sense. Here is this spacesuit, and they also did change kind of how smooth the camera is. That was one of the things as well listed. So here we have the spacesuit, and we're going to try on the other one now. You can see it's a little less intense looking. This is just your standard spacesuit. Maybe you could run faster in it. It doesn't seem as intense and big as the other one. And lastly, the port is on the bottom, so not on the back. And then if we sit in the seat, we're sitting in it properly, and you can have all the controls you have there. Now, one thing that I think is interesting is you could also make those like avatar-like creations with legs. Like that's almost like a perfect seat to kind of control like a robot or something. The next thing is that you can place vehicles in geostationary orbit. That makes sense. Characters can float in space. They do have improved rocket jet particles. They have rocket workbenches, vehicle groups. But one thing that is interesting also that I just read here is that they've not only improved the photographic cinematography, which I showed you, it's a little stabilized. They've added gas and liquid relief valves and gas tanks and liquid and gas meter components. So we're going to take a look at all that right now. When you search tank, you end up with these 4 new gas tanks, which is awesome. I love the size of all of them. I think they're quite useful. They look realistic to real life. Now this one's obviously huge, but then take a look at the other sizes. The medium one is what you like, I imagine you see in like a hospital, in those like little green like air tank containers, and the small one's very small. So there you have it, and you could set air, you could set hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, and you could set the fill level, which is pretty much going to be the pressure. But if we take a look at the size of these things here, you could see the small one's actually quite small. The medium one is kind of what I'd imagine is standard size. The large one's a bit bigger and whatever, but here you have it. It shows you, so that's our mixture of air. It has oxygen, nitrogen, all this different stuff. And they're all kind of mixed in between each other. It tells you the atmospheric pressure. So fairly useful and nice to just have these things so you don't have to make custom tanks, especially. For my next test, what I want to do is just have 4 of these medium containers that I like, and we're just going to put oxygen in all of them, and I want to see how the pressure works in these things. So this one I'm going to set to 0. This one I'm going to set to 1%. Then this one I want to set to 50, and the last one I'm going to leave it at 100. And let's take a look at how the atmospheric pressure or pressure inside these vessels look. So obviously this one is 0, so it's actually a vacuum. There's 0 atmospheres in here. If we take a look at the next one, we're going to see that there's going to be around 1 atmosphere, so that's just 1%. So 1% is atmospheric pressure, which is almost what we're in right now, the room. Then if we go to the next one, we can see that it is going to be 52 atmospheres. So there's already a lot of compressed oxygen. We have 5,500 or 5,463 liters. And then in the last one, we have double that, and we have 104 atmospheres of pressure. So a decent amount of oxygen or air in there. So that's how these vessels work. Very interesting to note. I don't understand the thing about the multi-bodies. Here you could see that my helicopter is not attached to my ship, but when I spawn it, it seems that it still is. So I'll have to do a little more exploring to understand what the multi-body and spawning separate things is. Another thing I noticed is that they improved the navigation tile locations in the editor for the add-ons. So you could see here when I open up the various add-on editors, you do have all the locations listed up here: Maine, Arctic, Sawyer, all these different islands. So they're just easier to navigate, easier to find, and much cleaner and polished looking than previously. The next thing I want to look at is the relief valve components. So very interesting. You'll have to have sort of a relief valve, and you could put this here, and then you end up getting gas relief, so the pressure or the liquid can pass across these 2 directional valves. So just kind of allows that, and you can mix it with an actual valve that has a handle, so you could end up closing it. Now that's quite interesting and useful for creating closed spaces. Then also we got this new fluid port end, which just looks like this, but really it allows you to have fluid moving in and out just like a normal fluid port. So it acts, I imagine, the same way, but you can have the pressure equalized through it. In this quick demonstration, we're just going to create sort of a custom tank here and have these fluid ports transfer or bring this tank into normal atmospheric pressure. So I'm just going to have that here, and then I'm going to go ahead and put my 2 new type of fluid meters, the gas meter and fluid meter in here. So there's two new components that are used instead of the previous fluid meter. Now you have a gas and liquid meter. So the way those work is you now can measure the fluid or the liquid and the gas volume inside a space, so it's no longer just one singular one. So we'll see how that works with all the previous vehicles where they just had a regular one of those, because now you'll have to also relieve the pressure. So if you have gas or diesel inside a closed space, you're gonna need to release the pressure of the air that's also in there. But here you can see if I go over the liquid meter and the gas meter, it tells us what's in there, and currently our oxygen and our air, which is a combination of all this stuff, is kind of balancing out. Maybe because we're breathing, the oxygen's going down and it's using the air from this tank. But there's our fluid port end. There's just more updates that they talk about here. You got the gas tanks, which we covered earlier. We have radio, solid propellant is used for the solid rocket boosters, sound effects. There's a new train yard for the starter bases, all that type of thing. Then there's a bunch of fixes that they did, which just includes like stutters and physics and whatnot. So there's a lot of fixes here. But now, very interesting, at the very bottom there's tips. So it says, be careful in opening doors between differently pressured areas. You may find yourself flung out. DLC owners get a new remix. There's mini earthly positional data components don't work in space, so you got to use your astronomy sensor. Then components that rely on air oxygen will be less effective in space. The characters and animals need oxygen to breathe, so don't trap yourself in a room, which was what we talked about. You need ventilation. And the last tip, this was too tempting to not try. Oh, right on. Look at that. Oh, cool. So that's an interesting tip for sure. You can use that fire extinguisher as a rocket booster of some kind when you're just floating around in space. Interesting, they did not add something to use, but again, interesting enough that they did go ahead and put this. I'm getting some speed here too. Holy, look at that. That is awesome. So with that, I want to thank you all for watching this video. Hopefully everyone gets to enjoy the new update, and let me know in the comments what you think. Just don't mention how your creation is broken. I don't want to hear it. I know they're broken. Mine are all broken. I will work to fix them. I know the developers are working to fix them, but for now we should at least enjoy the new component of this game. So thank you for watching. Stay tuned for more, and as always, happy Stormworksing, everyone.